Good morning, Malta and Gozo, and welcome to another episode of Lovin Daily. I'm your host, Sam Vassallo, joined by Tim Diacono, and here are today's headlines. Parchville Garden torn down because too many people hiding drugs in the bushes. Jürgen Fenech's lawyers charged in court for bribery of journalist. Recovered COVID-19 patients in Malta warn of persisting symptoms. Ownership registration of large tracts of Nadur land approved in a week despite a deed in Latin. And BOV warning induced Conrad Mitzi and cabinet to give Stewart a 100,000 million promise. Today's episode is brought to you by Miles Express. Miles Express offer tailor-made solutions to meet all clients' need and cater for both small and established businesses alike. Miles Express delivered to all around Malta and Gozo and offers same-day or next-day delivery. Check out more at www.milesxp.com to find out more. We have a very special guest this episode. We have EU Expert Peter Agius joining us. But first, let's get on to the headlines.
Yes, so there was a bit of environmental controversy yesterday when a small but wild garden in Parchville was torn down, and the grandson of the person who planted it in the first place spoke out about how his grandfather had actually planted this tiny garden as his own, move of resistance against the urbanization of his hometown, and yet now it has been destroyed. Now we spoke to the mayor of St. Julian's, Albert Buttigieg, who said that the reason the garden was torn down was because many people were using it as a hiding place for drugs. So people would go hide their drugs in the bushes and then pick them up. So, and also toss their waste inside the bushes as well. So it was quite unhygienic. But the solution appears to have been tear down the garden. It will eventually be replaced by something a bit less wild, but it's unfortunate really, you can't have something nature in its proper form growing in Malta, right?
I know, it feels like we're just looking for every single excuse possible under the sun to get rid of any kind of greenery we have on this island. I mean, we can see it from the recent Imsida Creek project. We're removing the little greenery there was in the garden for a massive grey car park. We're talking about removing Ormy's last green lung. Bomarat farmers are fighting for their right to grow food, in place of a roundabout. I think it's time that we take class action and fight the destruction once and for all. Moving on to our next story in court, Jürgen Fenech's lawyers have officially been charged with attempted bribery of a journalist. So Jürgen Fenech, who is the main suspect of the Daphne Caruana Galizia murder, his lawyers, Charles Melche and Gianluca Caruana Curan, have been charged essentially with trying to bribe a Times of Malta journalist Ivan Martin with 3 to 500 euro notes. So essentially it's been revealed that they wanted to build a kind of PR campaign to tarnish the credibility of state witness Melvin Thoma. They admitted to offering the money to the journalist, but categorically denied trying to bribe him. I'm not sure what you think about this.
Well, what's interesting about this is that Jürgen Fenech took a very active interest in making sure his name, he has a better name inside the media. Obviously, his name, to a certain extent, has been tarnished, seeing as he was arrested for the most shocking murder in recent Maltese political history, and it seems that his lawyers have embarked on a clear strategy to help him out through different media avenues. Now, obviously, Ivan Martin rejected the offer, but we don't yet know if his lawyers also offered the same amount of money to other people, and whether perhaps these people accepted the offer. Perhaps we'll find out in court in the coming months. Moving on, some recovered COVID-19 patients in Malta have opened up about how they're still experiencing some symptoms, even months after they recovered from the virus. Now, one of the most common symptoms seems to be the fact that people can still smell, but when there's no, smell nearby, they will somehow smell smoke or some metallic smell, which is quite strange, and it does show us how little we still understand about this virus, which is still not even a year old. On a more positive note, globally, the cases do seem to be declining for the first time since the pandemic, or in quite a big way. So hopefully we are on the downward curve now.
Indeed, in more local COVID-19 news, we've registered 139 new cases yesterday and 126 recoveries. There were no deaths reported, thankfully, and nearly 10,000 people have received their second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's super great. Now we cut to a small message from our sponsor.
At Miles Express, we go the extra mile to deliver your packages and documents on time, every time. Whether you're an online retailer that needs to deliver parcels to your customers or a professional looking to courier your documents, you can rest assured your clients will receive the professional service they deserve. We deliver all around Malta and Gozo, making sure your deliveries are carried out efficiently so you can focus on your business. Miles Express. The real express people.
And we're back onto our fourth story. So the ownership registration of large tracts of Nadur land have been approved in a week, despite the deed being in Latin. So just for your information, in order to register a piece of land, you need three things. You need a marked registry map, you need a legitimate deed of ownership, and a declaration that all your submissions are truthful. Now, in the case of this Nadur land, which was registered by a medieval foundation a year ago, the extensive deeds it has are in Latin. Latin, a language that no officials or registrar understand, and yet it was approved within a week. Now, there have been certain allegations and, in fact, police investigations as well, which unfortunately fizzled, that could allege that the lawyer that is running the foundation, Carmelo Gallia, was possibly colluding with the assistant of the land registrar, Marlon Vella. In fact, the two used to work together previously. And just to jog your memory on this, this is a joint investigation with Lovin Malta and the Shift News. This is the third story that we have on this land grab in Nadur. And essentially, registering this land, which has around 4 dozen housing units of residents that have lived there for generations, the land was registered, and the lawyer has been requesting tens of thousands from residents in order to live on the land. We'll be releasing more of these stories in due time, so keep following Lovin Malta for more on that.
Yes, I mean, there are some technical details in this story that can make it a bit complicated, but in a nutshell, what it's about is people who bought their homes, they invested their life savings into buying their properties, and then they found out that some other person decided or was claiming that, no, you know what, this land is mine. The reason being is that I have this deed from 500, 600 years ago to prove it. So these people's livelihoods are literally hanging in the balance over something that happened centuries ago. And although the authorities have promised to look into it, so far not much has been done in terms of concrete action. And finally, the Vitals court case instituted by former PN leader Adrian Delia continued yesterday. Former Energy Minister Conrad Mizzi took to the stand, but didn't really say much. In fact, he barely said anything at all. He refused to answer most questions on the grounds that there's a magisterial inquiry into the contract still ongoing. He's insisting that he should only be able to answer questions once it's concluded. However, his former permanent secretary, Ronald Mizzi, did open up a little bit, and he said about this controversial 100 million euro promise, that the government gave Stewart in the eventuality that the contract fails. So he said that the reason this happened was because Bank of Valletta was, concerned that the courts are going to cancel the contract, and were reluctant to grant a massive loan to Stewart, seeing that there was this risk that the whole thing could just collapse. So the government decided to save the project, step in, and promise basically a guarantee that if the courts do rule in favor of Adrian Delia and the government has to scrap the contract, Stewart won't lose out, Bank of Valletta won't lose out, unfortunately, taxpayers will.
As usual, taxpayers get the brunt of it, unfortunately. So just to remind you, this episode was sponsored by Miles Express. Miles Express offer tailor-made solutions to meet all clients' needs and cater for both small and established businesses alike. You can use their easy-to-use website and book deliveries online, either as a one-time booking or upload multiple delivery orders. You can head over to milesxp.com to find out more. Now don't go anywhere, because next we have an interview with EU Expert Peter Agius.
Make sure you're not the smartest person in the room.
Try to be a very good number two. That is the worst advice I ever received in my life.
If possible, make sure you're the stupidest person in the room. If you're not, you're in the wrong room.
I don't really believe in difficult decisions.
You always have that gut feeling in everything you do.
From that, I decided I have to be the number one in my own journey. No one else is number one.
A decision is a decision.
A lot of people place too much emphasis on luck.
Say more yeses, take more risks.
I let my gut be my compass, so to speak.
To invest more in relationships.
I think the biggest myth of business is that things are easy.
You have to fight back, you have to be aggressive in the same way.
Nothing is the end of the world except the end of the world.
You're the strengthened for it for your next channel.
Dominant in the same way, and level yourself to the same attitude.
Everybody else, I wanted to be some big sports hero, but that didn't happen, unfortunately.
You have to own up to that decision and you just execute.
Luck will always feature in everything in life.
Most likely, more is not the answer.
I wanted to become Malta's biggest businessman.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which is bullshit, basically.
Apparti li segwi l-ħolm tiegħek, però krux ta' kollox hija li temmen fik innifsek.
Welcome back to Lovin Daily. With me now is EU expert and former MEP candidate Peter Agius. Hi Peter, thanks for accepting this interview.
Bonjour, thanks for the invite. Glad to be here.
So let's cut to the chase a bit. Obviously a lot of vaccines are on the tips of everyone's tongues at the moment. Malta isn't doing badly in terms of vaccinating its people, but it's lagging way behind the UK as with any other country, as any other European country is. Is this because of Brexit?
Well, Brexit has had its impact, but our economy has diversified over the past years, also thanks to accession. But I think we were caught a bit unprepared for this kind of Brexit, because up till June last year, we were thinking about a UK staying in the customs union, that therefore there will be no customs tariffs, no extra VAT. So this kind of Brexit came as a surprise at the end, and to a lot of business people especially, and also consumers, this brought about the need for adaptation. I think we should also look beyond the UK for certain strategic areas. But certainly we have a strong relationship of affinity and historical ties with the UK, which we should keep as healthy and living as possible.
How has it impacted businesses in Malta, like in a tangible way?
Let me give an example. There were many businesses which were thinking that they were actually importing EU products. Okay, I just had a call this morning with a guy importing gluten-free, a whole series of gluten-free products, which were coming from Germany and France. But he was dealing with a UK company with headquarters in the UK, which was essentially buying from all over Europe and then was selling to this guy like 20 products in one pallet. You know, there are small businesses where you would need to buy, divide a consignment into very small amounts of different products. So these businesses were impacted with an additional VAT to be charged in Malta. Now, if you manage to sort out the fact that you don't pay VAT in the UK and you pay it only in Malta, that you can do, but that takes the complication of sorting out your bureaucracy. So bureaucracy was the first killer in this thing. Let's keep in mind also that for commerce, all the customs controls create an additional delay. So 1 or 2 days spent in the customs warehouses will impact a business even beyond the cost aspect. And we were used to not having all of this. We were accustomed to all the benefits and freedoms of EU membership. So this hits hard business, and the worst thing for business is uncertainty and paperwork and additional bureaucracy. So this is what Brexit means right now. There will be adaptation, but I think also there are a lot of businesses who are looking elsewhere. There are a lot of distribution houses in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France. I know a lot of websites selling very popular Malta who are now shipping from Germany instead of from the UK. So there's an adaptation process, and the best thing for consumer and businesses is to inform ourselves. I'm available for anyone who gets in touch to try to clarify a bit the situation.
Is the end result going to be that products from the UK are going to be more expensive over here?
Yeah, that will be, at the end of the day, that will have, there will be a cost aspect. So let's keep in mind that anything over 150 euros will be subject to customs duties. That depends on the product. So there are products which have a high custom duty because the European Union is producing that product. For instance, when it comes to cars, a lot of Maltese people were hit hard because they realized that on the importation of a second-hand car, you will need to pay an additional duty now. And the reason is simple. The European Union is a great producer of cars, BMW, Volvo, Fiat, wherever. Every big country has its own brand, and therefore the EU protects its market. And in Malta, what I would like to see more is a more proactive approach when it comes to EU matters, that we try to influence, we try to modify deals before realizing how they will impact us. Because this thing with cars, for instance, I saw it in Lovin Malta first. Okay, Brexit has happened like 3 months ago, and now we realize that it's impacting all these people importing cars. There are some of them which have a business model, importing 20, 30 cars a year.
Yeah, sometimes you don't really know what's going to hit you until it actually does, though.
Yeah, but that's the trick with EU matters, Tim. You need to anticipate. You need to work to see the wave on the horizon before it gets too close to shore. I mean, the last, for instance, news about this 400 million missed EU funding for our energy, for the gas pipeline is a case in point. You don't apply for EU funding late and ill-informed and without lobbying. Brussels is a haven for lobbying above the board. You meet people, you register it, you register interest. When I was negotiating EU legislation in Brussels, I used to get sometimes 10 to 12 calls a day from lobbyists trying to pitch in a meeting to tell about their case, to tell why they should they plead for instance, stricter provisions on certain business rules, on cosmetic products, on toys, on pharmaceuticals. These are the areas I dealt with.
So what's the issue though? Our MEPs aren't focusing, much on the issues that matter. I mean, to be fair, we only have 6 MEPs, so it's quite a small number. Where should their focuses lie?
You should focus always on national priorities and where you see that there is a challenge coming up. Now, right now, there is a whole load of EU money for green conversion, for digital transition, and we have our constant issues, for instance, with migration, and with Malta's adapting EU rules, rather, to Malta's particular case. So this is where the energy also of government has to be. For instance, we've seen catastrophic cases where we have, for instance, our trucking operators. Malta imports virtually 90% of all our of our needs, right? And a lot of that comes with land transport from all over Europe. And these new trucking rules adopted by Brussels mean that our trucking operators will have to hike prices. A few weeks ago, I was in Gozo, And I was being told by this entrepreneur that the container he was importing from the Netherlands is now costing €300 extra because the transport operator is prohibited now from making several stops, and the operator has to come back to Malta every 8 weeks. So these are technical provisions in euros, which then have an impact on our businessman and then on our consumer.
Okay, but why are they being introduced though, with this particular one?
This particular directive came into force this year, or actually in June last year, and it was negotiated, ironically, right in the middle of the Maltese presidency in 2017. You know, one can tell maybe we're a bit too distracted with the European, with the national election, which we know former Prime Minister announced spot on during the Malta's presidency of the European Council. But well, let's not take that as the only case. It's basically a trend. You know, we need to be much more vigilant. Now, it takes a huge effort. We must admit. You know, you mentioned that we have 6 MEPs. You know, the Germans would have 90. Okay, so handling this is not easy. But the least thing we need is a lack of preparation and lack of consultation. You know, Tim, that in April this year, we should submit plans. Malta should submit plans for all the EU budget that we should be spending in the next 7 years. You know, including the most important recovery plan, so that our economy, our employment, our businesses can absorb the corona, you know, the corona impact, and get out of it held high. Have you seen any public consultation on this next 7 years funding? I haven't seen any, and I follow this area avidly. Have you seen any consultation with the businesses, with the NGOs, with the employers, with the unions? I haven't seen this. Now, if we don't consult, if we don't create a public discussion on the things that matter, you know, Malta is rife with public discussion on matters of kronika or you know, developments or corruption or you know, misdemeanors of our politicians. This is the main thing on our mind, the misdemeanors of the politicians. No, you know, I'm fed up of this thing, you know. I'm tired of speaking about politicians. I'd like to speak about politics. I'd like to speak about political choices. How are we going to do to absorb EU funding when 37% needs to be dedicated to the green transition? You know, right now in Malta, a lot of us, I can speak for myself when I visit my mother or my kunyata. You know, you shiver in Maltese house. Do you feel this when you visit some?
Of many times. Yeah.
One of the older homes. That's because our buildings are not really insulated. They are not really well protected from the elements, especially in winter. You know, the European Union has adopted a directive for energy performance in buildings, obliging us or pushing us to construct our buildings or renovate our buildings in a way that they conserve energy. They are warmer in winter and cooler in summer. But Malta has done basically zilch about this, zero. In fact, we see apartment blocks going up, 6 stories, 7 stories. You know, I have nothing against construction. I mean, I think it's good to see development. But are these new buildings being built with energy performance in mind? Now, the European Union is telling us, listen, you have 327 million just for the corona recovery, you know, but you need to spend 37 of that on green measures. Where are we spending that? I mean, we are recycling just to 1% of our plastic, Tim. You know, 1%. We are having our countryside taken over by private interest, and the farmers can barely afford place to grow their crops. If you are a young farmer, I mean, your main ambition is to feed people. That's very noble. I think that's very noble, to produce, you know, to feed the population, whether you are a fisherman or a farmer or a producer or a manufacturer, whatever. Are we helping these guys? I don't think so. I think we're helping people who have a perverse business model, okay?
In fact, recently the finance minister admitted that Malta is facing a severe food crisis last year because of threats of a strike in Genoa.
Absolutely.
In this context, farmers have been saying that you need to support us more. Now we need to become a bit more sustainable.
I think that shocked a lot of people. I got that news item like from 50 or more people telling me, listen, Peter, you've been saying this for 3 years, but now the minister is saying it. I've been trying to plead the case for food security in Malta since ages, but unless it touches, it really hits government in its face. It kind of does not realize that this is a fundamental issue. Probably. And I have heard this from some politicians off the record. No one would want to be on record on this. But they would tell you, sometimes I get these people telling me, but Peter, why are you so fond of speaking about agriculture and farmers and Maltese products when it's just 2% of our GDP, where you just have 13,000 farmers? It's a small section, No, I don't accept this, because we are consumers. We need fresh and healthy products. And locally grown is better across all France. Because once the guy who has this pig farm in Zabouch or in Rendi, or you have 90 of them spread over Malta, once the pig farms go out of business, and they are very close to going out of business, some of them are already shutting down, Tim. This is something that's happening right now. Once the pig farm goes out of business, we don't have my Alta Malta, we don't have local pork. It will be okay for most of us for a while. But once the thing in Genoa happens again, it is bound to happen again. We are an island. In the war times, my grandmother used to tell me how they were suffering real hunger. And my other old people I met over the years will tell you, listen, for instance, we were living in the country, we were blessed in the war, but we were living in the cities, they were really starving. And God forbid we come to that, I'm not saying we should come to that or we will come to that, but our food security is a main concern. And also food health, food security, and food quality. And when you see that, just this week I put a post on Facebook about this. When I calculated the measures, the subsidies that farmers get for leaving a land barren, and you compare that to the subsidies you get for working the land in a way harmonious with nature, using organic methods, less pesticides, less invasive procedures, less plastics, so you would see more butterflies, more ladybirds, more Peter Ross robins or blackbirds. I think everyone should appreciate this. But the subsidies you get for that kind of land management is half of what you get when you leave your land barren.
So
our policies are promoting.
It pays them not to plant their crops then.
It's working against you. And when you have, a lot of land in Malta is owned by, let's say, rich people who then rent it out to the farmer. But if the owner can leave the land barren and getting €230 per tumolo, then there's no motivation to work the land. And this is just one of the areas. We can speak about energy, we can speak about employment.
Mm-hmm. Can we speak about energy for a bit? So the European Green Deal says that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. So recently you mentioned this, it impacted us when our application for €400 million in funding for a gas pipeline was rejected. The reason being it's not clean enough. So even though 10 years ago, we were talking about LNG as being something really clean, apparently the EU has moved on from this. It's now onto hydrogen and cleaner forms of energy. So how can Malta plan its energy infrastructure to be compliant with the carbon neutrality of 2050?
With these big projects, you need to find, this is like when you have two boats at sea. And when you have two boats at sea, you try to make sure that you never converge. Okay? You adjust your angle when you're driving to never really come in contact with another boat. But EU funding is totally different. EU funding is seeing a boat coming from far away and making sure to converge. And what's happening in Malta right now is that this conversion is not being planned anywhere. You know, the energy, 400 million missed EU funding. It was no surprise, to be honest, to me, because I know that we had an energy policy devised over a table in a private room before the election. We all know this, and we all have heard all these scandals, you know, about electrogas, about 17 Black. This is part of it, Tim. These things are very closely connected. Now, when you are planning that kind of deal, you cannot really think about EU funding. When everything is above board, when you need to plan 3 years in advance, when you need to convince European Commission that this is a national priority, you know. So I am not surprised. What I would be surprised if someone like Minister Miriam Dalli, which I admire in her achievements in Brussels, justifies, you know, a refusal to publish the letter of the European Commission explaining why we were refused this EU funding. So there is no transparency at all, and at least the least thing we have a right to is to know why, you know, why we lost this EU funding. And tragically, I expect this thing to happen across the board with other areas, including digital transition, including the Green Deal. So unless we change track and realize that when dealing with Brussels, we have to be professional. You know, because in Malta, I mean, Minister Silvio Schembri, he launched the digital innovation strategy recently, okay? He got his 4 minutes of fame on TVM, which obligingly puts him as a first item. So in Malta, you can do the trick like that. But in Brussels, you cannot convince with propaganda. You need sound arguments, and you need to lobby them hard using all the actors, the MEPs, the ministers, the commissioners, using all the actors in one direction.
Finally, just to conclude, besides being an expert on EU policy, you're also a politician. You were a candidate for the MEP election of 2017. How big an impact do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will have on political campaigns, on the next general election campaign? Do you think we're going to see an end to house visits and mass meetings?
Yeah, to be honest, you know, I would totally dread the idea of having a general election in this kind of setting. You know, I've been meeting people over the last weeks, and most people cannot really recognize you if you're just wearing a mask. So for a politician, you know, people recognizing you and associating you with a cause or with it's fundamental. So if we have politics without the contact, I think we are reducing greatly the idea of you know, why we are having an election. On the other hand, of course, you have to understand that candidates, politicians, ministers, you have to admire that they are still trying to keep in contact one way or another. Personally, I'm using much more now, WhatsApp messages, Facebook messages, emails, trying to reach out. But you know, Tim, before entering politics, I used to snub my cuñata for going to coffee mornings, where you have large gatherings of people, you know, having a pasticcia and meeting their politician. But then I came to realize that maybe that is a fundamental part of politics, that people meet their politician, that politicians knock doors. Now, you may not open the door, you may not want to listen, but it's very important. And I think this is not part of our idiosyncrasy. I think this is something good about Malta, that the politicians want to keep the contact. So I would hope that one good aspect of the after COVID would be that we return, at least in part, to our methods, hopefully abstaining from some of the less noble aspects like funding campaigns with government money and all of that.
Peter Agius, thank you very much for
Grazie
joining me on Lovin Daily today. That's it for today. Make sure you follow lovinmalta.com for all the latest updates on what's going on in this country. Thank you very much for following and have a day full of loving.